The beginning, a sudden shock, written in English with a powerful and captivating tone. Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought was certain, everything you had worked for, was ripped away in an instant? That's exactly what happened to Melody Reynolds. After 29 years of loyalty, dedication, and tireless work, she thought she was 3 days away from the finish line, a well-earned retirement, and the security she had spent her entire career building. But instead of celebrating her decades of service, Melody found herself blindsided by a single sentence that would change everything. "We're letting you go." Melody was 61 years old, a seasoned professional who had spent nearly 3 decades as the head of compliance at GRW Manufacturing. She wasn't just another employee, she was the backbone of the company. When things went wrong, Melody was the one people turned to. When regulations tightened or audits loomed, it was Melody's steady hand that guided GRW through the storm. To her colleagues, she was more than a manager. She was a mentor, a problem solver, and a symbol of integrity. And yet, none of that seemed to matter anymore. The man delivering the news was David Langston, GRW's new director, a man who had been with the company for barely 6 months. He sat across from Melody in the sterile conference room with an air of practiced sympathy that didn't quite reach his eyes. "This decision wasn't easy," he said, his voice laced with artificial regret. "But due to budget cuts, we have to make some tough choices." Budget cuts? Melody's mind raced. Just last week, GRW had announced record-breaking profits. They were thriving, expanding into new markets, hiring new staff, but now they couldn't afford to keep her on? The words felt like a slap in the face. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "David," she began calmly, though her voice trembled slightly, "I've been with this company for 29 years. My retirement benefits are set to kick in 3 days from now. Are you seriously telling me this is about budget cuts?" David avoided her gaze, shuffling papers on the table as if they held answers he couldn't bring himself to say out loud. "It's not personal," he muttered. "Not personal?" Melody felt anger rise in her chest like a fire threatening to consume her. How could it not be personal? This wasn't just a job, it was her life's work. And now, 3 days before she could finally claim the pension she had earned through decades of sacrifice and dedication, they were pulling the rug out from under her. That night, Melody sat alone in her living room, staring at the severance agreement they had handed her on the way out. It was thick with legal jargon and empty promises, a few months' pay in exchange for her silence. If she signed it, she'd be giving up any chance to fight back. But if she didn't, what then? Her mind drifted back over the years she had spent at GRW, the late nights poring over compliance reports, the weekends sacrificed to meet deadlines, the countless times she had gone above and beyond to protect the company from legal trouble. And yet, despite everything she had given them, this was how they repaid her. But as Melody flipped through the pages of the agreement, something caught her eye, a clause buried deep in the fine print that required her to waive any claims against the company related to financial misconduct. Financial misconduct? The words sent a chill down her spine. Over the years, Melody had seen things at GRW that didn't sit right, irregularities in expense reports, discrepancies in audit findings, but every time she raised concerns, they were brushed aside or dismissed as clerical errors. She had kept meticulous records of these incidents just in case they ever became an issue. And now it seemed like they might be. The next morning brought clarity. Melody made a decision. She wasn't going to sign. Instead, she picked up her phone and called Gregory Santos, the former CFO of GRW who had left the company 2 years earlier under mysterious circumstances. Gregory had always been one of the few people at GRW who shared Melody's commitment to doing things by the book. If anyone could help her make sense of what was happening, it was him. "Melody," Gregory said when he answered her call, "I've been waiting for this." His words took her by surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean I knew this day would come," he replied grimly. "When I left GRW, I tried to warn people about what was going on there, about how they were cutting corners and hiding things, but no one wanted to listen." Melody felt a knot form in her stomach. "Hiding what?" Gregory hesitated for a moment before answering. "Fraud," he said finally. "Financial fraud on a massive scale." As Gregory explained what he knew about GRW's practices, how they had been falsifying financial reports to inflate their profits and avoid regulatory scrutiny, Melody felt both anger and determination take hold of her. This wasn't just about her pension anymore. It was about holding GRW accountable for their actions. She spent the next few days combing through her files, years' worth of emails, memos, and reports that documented every red flag she had ever encountered at GRW. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Her termination wasn't about budget cuts. It was about silencing her before she could expose them. But Melody wasn't going to let that happen. By the end of the week, Melody had compiled enough evidence to make her case, and then some. She reached out to Gregory again, who connected her with contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Together, they began building a whistleblower case against GRW Manufacturing. For Melody, it wasn't just about seeking justice for herself. It was about protecting others from being exploited by companies that put profits above people. I gave them 29 years of my life, she told Gregory during one late-night phone call. I'm not going to let them get away with this, not for me and not for anyone else. And with that resolve burning brighter than ever before, Melody prepared herself for what lay ahead, a fight not just for her own dignity but for justice itself. Part 2. A bold decision, written in English with a captivating tone and emotional depth. Have you ever stood at a crossroads, knowing that whichever path you chose would change your life forever? That's where Melody Reynolds found herself. The severance agreement sat on her kitchen table like a silent ultimatum. If she signed it, she'd get a few months' pay and the promise of silence. But if she didn't, well, that was the unknown. And the unknown was terrifying. Melody stared at the stack of papers, her mind racing. She thought about everything she had sacrificed for GRW Manufacturing, 29 years of late nights, missed family gatherings, and relentless dedication. She thought about how they had repaid her with betrayal, how they had tried to strip her of not just her pension but her dignity. And then she thought about the clause buried in the fine print, the one that required her to waive any claims related to financial misconduct. That clause wasn't there by accident. Melody knew that much. It was a shield, a way for GRW to protect itself from whatever skeletons might be hiding in its closet. And if there was one thing Melody had learned in her nearly 3 decades as head of compliance, it was this: where there's smoke, there's fire. The next morning, Melody made her decision. She wasn't going to sign. Instead, she picked up the phone and called Gregory Santos. Gregory had been GRW's chief financial officer for years before he left under mysterious circumstances. He was one of the few people at the company who had shared Melody's commitment to doing things by the book. If anyone could help her make sense of what was happening, it was him. When Gregory answered the phone, his voice was warm but cautious. "Melody," he said, "I've been waiting for your call." "Waiting?" Melody asked, surprised. "I knew something like this would happen eventually," Gregory replied. "When I left GRW, I tried to warn people about what was going on there, about how they were cutting corners and hiding things, but no one wanted to listen." Melody felt a chill run down her spine. "Hiding what?" Gregory hesitated for a moment before answering. "Fraud," he said finally. "Financial fraud on a massive scale." As Gregory explained what he knew about GRW's practices, how they had been falsifying financial reports to inflate their profits and avoid regulatory scrutiny, Melody felt a mix of anger and determination take hold of her. This wasn't just about her pension anymore. It was about something much bigger. Over the next few days, Melody began combing through her files, years' worth of emails, memos, and reports that documented every red flag she had ever encountered at GRW. She remembered the discrepancies and audit findings that were dismissed as clerical errors, the expense reports that didn't add up, the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked into the room. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. Her termination wasn't about budget cuts. It was about silencing her before she could expose them. But Melody wasn't going to be silenced. By the end of the week, Melody had compiled enough evidence to make her case, and then some. She reached out to Gregory again, who connected her with contacts at the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Together, they began building a whistleblower case against GRW Manufacturing. For Melody, this wasn't just about seeking justice for herself. It was about holding GRW accountable for their actions and protecting others from being exploited by companies that put profits above people. "I gave them 29 years of my life," she told Gregory during one late-night phone call. "I'm not going to let them get away with this, not for me and not for anyone else." The decision to become a whistleblower wasn't an easy one. Melody knew there would be risks, professional risks, personal risks, but she also knew it was the right thing to do. She spent hours on the phone with SEC investigators, walking them through every detail of what she had uncovered. She handed over emails that showed clear patterns of financial manipulation, internal memos that revealed efforts to cover up discrepancies, and audit reports that painted a damning picture of GRW's practices. As the investigation gained momentum, Melody found herself facing new challenges. Word began to spread within GRW that she was working with regulators, and some of her former colleagues turned against her. They accused her of being disloyal, of trying to bring down the company they had all worked so hard to build. But Melody refused to back down. "This isn't about loyalty," she told one former coworker who confronted her outside a grocery store. "It's about accountability." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a reminder that loyalty should never come at the expense of integrity. As weeks turned into months, Melody watched from the sidelines as SEC investigators dug deeper into GRW's operations. The evidence she provided became the foundation for their case, a case that would ultimately expose years of financial fraud and lead to sweeping changes within the company. But even as progress was being made, Melody couldn't help but feel a sense of isolation. Whistleblowing came with its own set of challenges, loneliness being one of them. She missed the camaraderie she once felt at work, missed being part of something bigger than herself. It was during one particularly difficult evening that Gregory called her out of the blue. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Melody asked. "For doing what I couldn't," Gregory replied. "For standing up when it would have been easier to stay silent." His words brought tears to Melody's eyes, not just because they validated everything she had been through, but because they reminded her why she had made this decision in the first place. By the time SEC announced its findings against GRW Manufacturing, Melody felt a sense of vindication she hadn't thought possible. The company's board of directors resigned en masse, senior executives were fired or forced out, and GRW faced millions of dollars in fines and penalties. But for Melody, this wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point. She realized that while GRW might have tried to silence her, they had ultimately given her something far more valuable, a voice. And with that voice came power, the power to make a difference not just for herself, but for others who might find themselves in similar situations. Part 3, The Legal Battle, written in English with a compelling tone and emotional depth. Have you ever wondered what it takes to challenge a giant? To stand up against an entire system built to protect the powerful and silence those who dare to speak out? That's exactly the fight Melody Reynolds found herself in. Armed with nothing but her integrity and years of meticulous records, she stepped into the legal arena, ready to take on GRW Manufacturing and expose the truth they had worked so hard to bury. Melody's journey began with a single phone call to the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. She had spent weeks gathering evidence, emails, financial reports, internal memos, all meticulously documenting the financial misconduct she had witnessed during her nearly 3 decades at GRW. It wasn't just about discrepancies or minor clerical errors. It was about deliberate fraud. GRW had been falsifying financial reports, inflating profits, and manipulating audits to present a picture of success while hiding their unethical practices. When Melody first spoke to the SEC investigators, she was nervous but resolute. "I have information," she told them, "and I think it's something you need to see." The SEC took her claims seriously. Within days, they launched an official investigation into GRW Manufacturing. Melody became their key witness, providing not just documents but context, explaining how GRW's leadership had systematically ignored her warnings and dismissed her concerns as overreactions. She told them about the patterns she had noticed: inflated expense reports that didn't add up, audit results that were quietly altered, and executive bonuses that seemed suspiciously high given the company's supposed budget cuts. As the investigation unfolded, Melody found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, she felt vindicated. Finally, someone was listening. But on the other hand, she knew this fight wouldn't be easy. Whistleblowing wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about enduring the backlash that came with it. And backlash came quickly. Word spread within GRW that Melody was working with regulators. Former colleagues who once praised her professionalism now turned their backs on her. Some accused her of being disloyal, of trying to destroy the company they had all worked so hard to build. Others whispered behind her back, calling her a troublemaker or worse. One day, while grocery shopping, Melody ran into a former coworker who confronted her in the middle of the aisle. "Why are you doing this?" they demanded. "You're going to ruin everything." Melody met their gaze steadily. "I'm not ruining anything," she replied firmly. "I'm holding people accountable." Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a reminder that loyalty should never come at the expense of integrity. As the SEC investigation gained momentum, GRW's leadership scrambled to cover their tracks. Executives resigned abruptly, internal emails were deleted, and attempts were made to discredit Melody's claims. But none of it worked. The evidence she had provided was too damning to ignore. The SEC uncovered years of fraudulent activity, falsified financial statements designed to inflate shareholder confidence, misappropriation of funds meant for employee benefits, and deliberate manipulation of audit results to hide losses. It wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. For Melody, each new revelation felt like both a victory and a burden. She was glad the truth was coming out, but frustrated by how long it had taken for anyone to listen. If they'd taken me seriously years ago, she told an investigator during one meeting, none of this would have happened. The legal battle reached its peak when GRW Manufacturing was formally charged with multiple counts of financial fraud and corporate misconduct. The company's board of directors resigned en masse, and senior executives, including David Langston, were fired or forced out. But even as justice seemed within reach, Melody faced another challenge, testifying in court. Standing in front of a room filled with lawyers, reporters, and former colleagues wasn't easy. But Melody knew this was her moment, the chance to tell her story and ensure that GRW couldn't sweep their actions under the rug. "I gave this company 29 years of my life," she said during her testimony. "I believed in what we were building together. But when I saw things that weren't right, things that put profits above people, I spoke up because I thought it was my duty. And for that, I was silenced." Her words resonated deeply with everyone in the courtroom. They weren't just about GRW. They were about every organization that prioritized greed over ethics and every employee who had ever been punished for doing the right thing. When the verdict finally came down, it was clear GRW Manufacturing was guilty on all counts. The company faced millions of dollars in fines and penalties, executives were held personally accountable for their actions, and new compliance measures were put in place to prevent future misconduct. But perhaps most importantly, Melody's courage had set a precedent, one that showed whistleblowers everywhere that their voices mattered. For her role in exposing GRW's fraud, Melody received not only public recognition but also financial compensation through the SEC whistleblower program. It wasn't just about money, it was about validation. The system had worked because she had refused to stay silent. In the aftermath of the trial, Melody found herself reflecting on everything she had been through, the betrayal by her company, the isolation from former colleagues, and the long months spent fighting for justice. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She thought about all the people who would benefit from GRW's reforms, employees who would finally receive fair treatment, shareholders who could trust that their investments were being handled ethically, and future whistleblowers who might find courage in her story. "This isn't just my victory," she told Gregory during one final phone call after the case closed. "It's ours." Gregory chuckled softly on the other end of the line. "You did what most people wouldn't have dared," he said. "You stood up when it mattered most." Melody's fight wasn't over, not entirely. She knew there were still companies out there cutting corners and putting profits above people. But now she also knew something else. One person could make a difference. And as she looked toward the future, toward new opportunities to advocate for whistleblower protections and corporate accountability, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Because sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't just change your life, it changes everything around you too. Part 4, Victory for Justice, written in English with a captivating tone and emotional depth. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to finally win after fighting against all odds? For Melody Reynolds, victory wasn't just about reclaiming what was taken from her. It was about proving that truth and integrity could triumph over greed and betrayal. After months of battling GRW Manufacturing, the verdict was in. Justice had been served. The courtroom was packed on the day the decision was announced. Melody sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, as the judge read out the charges against GRW. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, deliberate manipulation of financial reports. Each count felt like a vindication of everything Melody had endured: the sleepless nights, the isolation, the relentless fight to expose the truth. When the guilty verdict was finally declared, Melody felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It wasn't just relief, it was validation. She had stood up against one of the most powerful companies in her industry and won. And now, GRW Manufacturing would face millions of dollars in fines, sweeping reforms, and public scrutiny that would forever change its legacy. But for Melody, this victory wasn't just about punishing GRW. It was about making things right. Shortly after the trial concluded, she received an official letter from the company. It contained two things: a reinstatement of her pension benefits and a formal apology signed by the CEO. Melody read the letter carefully, her emotions swirling as she processed its contents. The apology acknowledged GRW's wrongdoing and expressed regret for how she had been treated. It was a rare admission of guilt from a company that had spent years covering up its unethical practices. But for Melody, it wasn't enough. She didn't want their apology, not really. What she wanted was accountability. And while the verdict had delivered that in part, Melody knew there was still work to be done. In the weeks following the trial, Melody received an unexpected offer from GRW. They wanted her to return as a consultant to help reform their compliance policies and rebuild their reputation. The offer came with an impressive salary and perks that most people would find hard to refuse. But Melody didn't hesitate. She declined. "I don't want to be part of an organization that only values ethics when it's convenient," she told them firmly. "You didn't stand by me when it mattered most, and I won't stand by you now." Her decision shocked many, but for Melody, it was clear this wasn't about money or titles. It was about staying true to herself and her principles. Instead of returning to GRW, Melody chose a different path, one that aligned with her vision for justice and accountability. She began working with regulatory agencies like SEC and advocacy groups focused on whistleblower protections. Her goal was simple: to ensure that no one else would have to go through what she did. Melody traveled across the country, speaking at conferences and workshops about the importance of corporate transparency and ethical leadership. Her story resonated deeply with audiences: employees who felt powerless in their workplaces, whistleblowers who feared retaliation, leaders who wanted to build organizations rooted in integrity. At one event in Washington, D.C., Melody shared a moment that brought the room to tears. "I remember sitting in my car after being fired," she said softly. "I felt like everything I'd worked for had been taken from me, not just my pension but my dignity, my identity as someone who believed in doing the right thing. But then I realized something: they could take my job, but they couldn't take my voice." Her words echoed through the auditorium like a rallying cry, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal, we have the power to stand up for what's right. Meanwhile, GRW Manufacturing continued its attempts at damage control. The company launched new compliance initiatives and rebranded itself as a champion of corporate responsibility. They even reached out to Melody again, asking if she would consider endorsing their efforts. This time, Melody didn't just decline, she made her stance clear. "You don't need my endorsement," she told them bluntly. "You need to earn back the trust of your employees, and that starts with actions, not words." Her refusal became headline news, further cementing her reputation as someone who wouldn't compromise her principles for convenience or profit. As months turned into years, Melody's work began to make a tangible impact. She helped draft legislation aimed at strengthening whistleblower protections across industries. She mentored individuals who wanted to report unethical practices but didn't know where to start. And she collaborated with organizations to create training programs for leaders on how to foster cultures of accountability within their companies. One day, while reviewing proposals for a new initiative focused on employee rights, Melody received an email from someone she hadn't spoken to in years: Gregory Santos. "Melody," he wrote simply, "thank you for reminding me why we do this." His words brought tears to her eyes, not because they validated her efforts, but because they reminded her that this fight wasn't just hers. It belonged to everyone who believed in doing what's right. By the end of that year, Melody had become a leading voice in corporate ethics advocacy. Her work wasn't just changing policies, it was changing lives. Employees who once felt powerless now had resources and support systems designed to protect them. Whistleblowers who feared retaliation found courage in her story. And companies across industries began rethinking how they approached compliance and transparency. For Melody, this wasn't just about redemption, it was about creating lasting change. "This isn't just my victory," she told an audience during one keynote speech. "It's ours." Her words resonated deeply with everyone listening, a reminder that standing up for what's right doesn't just benefit you, it benefits everyone around you too. As Melody looked toward the future, toward new opportunities to advocate for justice and accountability, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Because sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't just change your life, it changes everything around you too.